I am TJ. I'm our technical director. All of the actors you'll be hearing tonight are volunteering their time and talent from their homes to bring a little bit of entertainment to your homes. We want to thank them all very much for joining us. We've been doing this for an entire year, and in addition to the actors you'll be seeing tonight, we've had this will be our 81st live reading. So we've had 80 readings before this, brought to you by 130 actors on 4 different continents from 5 different countries and more time zones than I can count anymore. We want to thank them all for being with us. And whether it's their first time joining us or their 80th time joining us, we want to thank all of the actors here for reading with us. A special thanks tonight to Taylor Flanagan and Haley Height for being our interpreting interns. Thank you very much for your work tonight. We would like to thank our friend, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare, for hosting this on his pages. Check out his website at shakespeareapproves.com and his Patreon at patreon.com/Shakespeare. You can find out more about him at the aforementioned website or by visiting his Facebook page, Shakespeare Approves, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. I will try to put links to visit him as well as some of our other performer friends in the comments of this video. As always, we want to acknowledge and thank all of the medical professionals and essential workers who have been working tirelessly to keep us all as healthy and safe as possible. If you are interested in more information about us and our totally volunteer organization, check out our website, zenithplayers.com. Feel very free to check out our very attractive donations page. 100% of all donations go towards production costs, which these days consist of the various subscriptions that allow for these readings to happen. If you would like to read with us in future projects, send us an email at casting@zenithplayers.com. We will get you on board. Join us next Saturday as we present The Buckeye, but for now, relax and enjoy Miguel Vega as Nick Carraway, Patrick Brockway as Tom Buchanan, Caitlin Jurowitz as Jordan Baker, Jacqueline Hume as Myrtle Wilson, Andrew Gellos as George Wilson, with Heba Tulan as Daisy, Taylor Flanagan as the voice of Daisy, and Shakira Searle as the great Gatsby. Act 1.
In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. Gatsby. The man who gives his name to this story was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him. Some heightened sensitivity that the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. That this responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which dignified under the name of creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift of hope, a romantic readiness such as I had never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again.
Nick, darling, I'm paralyzed with happiness.
Daisy.
Jordan, this is my cousin, Nick. He and Tom met at Yale.
Oh, another Yale football player.
No, that was all Tom. I never got around to.
Nick, good to see you. Can I get you a drink?
No, thanks. It's a bit early for me.
Suit yourself. How's the drive?
Oh, it was beautiful. This house.
Where are you staying?
Just across the Sound.
Oh, in West Ag?
Just a small rental house I found.
How quaint.
This is the most interesting place. I'm right between 2 huge mansions that probably each rent for $15,000 for the summer.
What does your place run you?
$80 a month.
Oh, well, welcome to East Egg then.
I hope you'll be staying for a little while, at least.
Of course. I need to make my fortune.
Tom, you must promise to help him.
I stopped off in Chicago for a day on my way out, and a dozen people send their love.
Do they miss me?
The whole town is desolate. All the cars have the left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there's a persistent wail all night along the North Shore.
How gorgeous. Let's go back, Tom, tomorrow. You want to see the baby.
I'd like to.
She's asleep. She's 3 years old. Haven't you seen her?
Never.
Well, you ought to see her. She's just...
What are you doing these days, Nick?
I'm a bond man.
Who with?
Property trust.
Never heard of him.
You will. You will if you stay in the East.
Oh, I'll stay in the East, don't you worry. I'd be a goddamn fool to live anywhere else.
Absolutely. I'm stiff. I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I can remember.
Don't look at me. I've been trying to get you to New York all afternoon.
Care for a drink?
No thanks. I'm absolutely in training.
You are. How you ever get anything done is beyond me.
You live in West Egg. I know somebody there.
I don't know a single
Well, you
person.
must know Gatsby.
Gatsby? What Gatsby?
He's in that enormous house that looks like it popped out of southern France.
Doesn't it have a tower?
Haven't you seen those parties?
Yes. I'm right next door.
In 2 weeks, it'll be the longest day in the year. Do you always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it? I always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it.
We ought to plan something.
All right. What do we plan? What do people plan?
Daisy, your hand.
Look, I heard it.
The knuckles black and blue.
You did it, Tom. I know you didn't mean to, but you did do it. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man, a great, big, hulking, physical specimen of a man.
I hate the word hulking, even in kidding.
Hulking.
I've got a nice place here.
Yes.
It belonged to Domain, the oil man.
You make me feel uncivilized, Daisy.
Civilization's going to pieces. I'm gonna be a terrible pessimist about things. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Goddard?
Tom,
Why, no.
Excuse me.
Tom's getting very profound. He reads deep books with long words in them. I love to see you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, an absolute rose. Doesn't he, Jordan? An absolute rose. Excuse me.
I'm not even faintly like a rose. This Mr. Gatsby you spoke of is my neighbor.
Don't talk. I want to hear what happens.
Is something happening?
You mean to say you don't know? I thought everybody knew.
I don't.
Why, Tom's got some woman in New York.
Got some woman.
She might have had the decency not to telephone him at dinner time, don't you think?
Couldn't be helped. I looked outdoors for a minute and it's very romantic outdoors. There's a bird on the lawn that I think must be a nightingale. Come over on the Cunard or White Star Line. He's singing away. Oh, it's romantic, isn't it, Tom?
Very romantic. If it's light enough after dinner, Nick, I want to take you down to the stables. Excuse me.
We don't know each other very well, Nick. Even if we are cousins, you didn't come to my wedding.
I wasn't back from the war.
That's true. Well, I've had a very bad time, Nick. And I'm pretty cynical about everything.
I suppose she talks and eats and everything.
Who?
Your daughter.
Oh, Pammy. Oh, yes. Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear it?
Very much.
It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling and asked the nurse right away less than an hour or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. All right, I said. I'm glad it's a girl. And I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool. You see, I think everything's terrible anyhow. Everybody thinks so. The most advanced people. And I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything. Sophisticated. God, I'm sophisticated.
10 o'clock. Time for this girl to go to bed.
Jordan's going to play in the tournament tomorrow over at Westchester.
Oh, you're Jordan Baker, the golfer.
Good night. Wake me at 8, won't you?
If you'll get up.
I will. Good night, Mr. Caraway. See you anon.
Of course you will. In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick, and I'll sort of fling you together. You know, lock you up accidentally in linen closets and push you out to sea in a boat and all that sort of thing.
Good night. I haven't heard a word.
She's a nice girl. They oughtn't to let her run around the country this way.
Who oughtn't to?
Her family.
Her family is one aunt about 1,000 years old. Besides, Nick's going to look after her, aren't you? She's going to spend lots of weekends out here this summer. I think the home influence will be very good for her.
Is she from New York?
From Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together there. Our beautiful white.
Do you ever give Nick a little heart-to-heart talk on the veranda?
Did I? I can't seem to remember. But I think we talked about the downfall of civilization. Yes, I'm sure we did. It sort of crept up on us. And first thing you know...
Don't believe everything you hear, Nick.
Yes. Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men.
Come on, I want you to meet my girl. Hello? Wilson. How's business?
I can't complain. When are you going to sell me that car?
Next week. I've got my man working on it now.
Works pretty slow, don't he?
No, he doesn't. And if you feel that way about it, maybe I better sell it somewhere else after all.
I don't mean that. I just meant.
Get some chairs, why don't you, so somebody can sit down.
Oh, sure.
I want to see you. Get on the next train.
All right.
I'll meet you by the newsstand on the lower level. Terrible place, isn't it?
Awful.
It does her good to get away.
Doesn't her husband object?
Wilson? He thinks she goes to see her sister in New York. He's so dumb he doesn't know he's alive.
I have to leave you here.
No, you don't. Myrtle will be hurt if you don't come up to the apartment, won't you, Myrtle?
Come on. I'll telephone my sister Catherine. She's said to be very beautiful by people who ought to know.
Well, I'd like to, but
Most of these fellas will cheat you every time. All they think of is money. I had a woman up here last week to look at my feet, and when she gave me the bill, you'd have thought she had my appendicitis out.
great dress.
It's just a crazy old thing. I just slip it on sometimes when I don't care what I look like.
But it looks wonderful on you.
What do you think of my place, Mr. Carraway?
It's nice.
It's a gift from Tom.
Dancing bores me. Come on, Nick, let's go get a drink.
You know, it's getting late. I should probably.
It's getting late. It's getting late. Come on, Nick. Make money tomorrow.
It is tomorrow.
Drink up.
Dance with me, Mr. Carraway. Do you live down on Long Island too?
I live in West Egg.
Really? I was down there at a party about a month ago at a man named GATSBY's. Do you know him?
I live next door to him.
Well, they say he's a nephew or cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm's. That's where all his money comes from.
Really? Somebody told me that.
I'm scared of him. I'd hate to have him get anything on me. Did you know he was a German spy during the war? I heard from a man who knew all about him, grew up with him in Germany.
What, wasn't he in the American army during the war?
You look at him sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking at him. I'll bet he killed a man.
In conversation with some friends of Myrtle, a Mr. and Mrs. McKee, I learned the true extent of the relationship between Tom and Mrs. Wilson. Apparently, the topic was of great interest and speculation in this particular social circle. Mrs. McKee insisted that neither Tom nor Myrtle should stand the person that they are married to. Mr. Wilson had been frequently described by Myrtle as
a stupid, ambitionless bastard who smells like grease.
It was also speculated that Daisy was the dividing force between Tom and Myrtle.
I've been living over that garage for 11 years. Truly, Tom's the first sweetie I ever had. Did I ever tell you how we met? It was on the two little seats facing each other that are always the last ones left on the train. I was going up to New York to see my sister and spend the night. He had on a dress suit and patent leather shoes, and I couldn't keep my eyes off of him. But every time he looked at me, I had to pretend to be looking at the advertisement over his head. When he came into the station, he was next to me, and his white shirt front pressed against my arm. And so I told him I'd have to call a policeman, but he knew I lied. I was so excited that when I got into a taxi with him, I didn't hardly know I was getting into a subway train. All I kept thinking about over and over was, you can't live forever. You can't live forever.
Mr. McKee was asleep on a chair with his fist clenched in his lap, like a photograph of a man of action. Taking out my handkerchief, I wiped from his cheek the spot of dried lather that continued to worry me for days. The little dog was sitting on the table, looking with blind eyes through the smoke, and from time to time groaning faintly. People disappeared, reappeared, made plans to go somewhere, and then lost each other, searched for each other, found each other a few feet away.
I've got to get another one tomorrow. I'm going to make a list of all the things I've got to get. A massage and a wave and a collar for the dog and one of those cute little ashtrays where you touch a spring and a wreath like a black silk bow for Mother's grave that'll last all summer. I got to write down a list so I won't forget all the things I got to do.
Sometime toward midnight, Tom Buchanan and Mrs. Wilson stood face to face discussing, in impassioned voices, whether Mrs. Wilson had any right to mention Daisy's name.
Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. I'll say it whenever I want. Daisy, Daisy.
Making a short, deft movement, Tom broke her nose with his open hand. Then there were bloody towels upon the bathroom floor, and women's voices scolding, and high over the confusion, a long broken wail of pain. And all the while there was music from my neighbor's house. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whispering and the champagne and the stars. And then early one Saturday morning, a chauffeur crossed my lawn and gave me a surprisingly formal note. The honor would be Gatsby's, it said, if I would attend his little party that night.
Your face is familiar. Weren't you in the 1st Division during the war?
Why, yes. I was in the 28th Infantry.
I was in the 16th until June 1918. I knew I'd seen you somewhere before. Listen, I've just bought one of those new hydroplanes, and I'd very much like to try it out in the morning. Want to go with me, old sport? Just near the shore along the Sound.
What time?
Any time that suits you best.
Mr. Carraway.
Ms. Baker, hello.
I thought you might be here. I remembered you lived next door. Having a good time now?
Much better. This is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there, and this man Gatsby sent over his chauffeur with an invitation.
I'm Gatsby.
What? Oh, I beg your pardon.
I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host. If you want anything, you just ask for it, old sport. Excuse me, I'll rejoin you later.
Who is he? Do you know?
He's just a man named Gatsby.
Where is he from, I mean, and what does he do?
Now you're started on the subject. Well, he told me once he was an Oxford man. However, I don't believe it.
Why not?
I don't know. I just don't think he went there. Anyhow, he gives large parties, and I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy.
While I was enjoying my conversation with Jordan Baker, an invitation to speak with Mr. Gatsby came to me via Mr. Wolfsheim, who felt the need to not only provide details about Ms. Baker's fame, which I knew, but also his own information as to the upbringing of Mr. Gatsby. Mr. Wolfsheim took delight in informing me that Gatsby was an Oxford man of fine breeding, the kind of person he would like to introduce to his mother and sister. When I inquired as to whether his interesting cufflinks were ivory, he informed me that they were, in fact, the finest specimens of human molars. An interesting idea.
Fascinating character, isn't he?
Who is he? A dentist?
No, he's a gambler. He's the man who fixed the World Series back in 1919.
Fixed the World Series? How did he happen to do that?
He just saw the opportunity.
Why isn't he in jail?
They can't get him, old sport. He's a smart man. Don't forget, we're going up in the hydroplane tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
I'll be there. Good night.
Good night, old sport. Good night.
He smiled, and suddenly there seemed to be a pleasant significance in my having been among the last to go, as if he had desired it all the time. 9 o'clock in the morning came, and Gatsby found me looking with admiration at his hydroplane.
It's pretty, isn't it?
Very.
Look here, old sport. What's your opinion of me, anyhow? Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life. I don't want you to get a wrong idea about me from all these stories you hear. I'll tell you God's truth. I'm the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West. All dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford, because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It is a family tradition.
What part of the Middle West?
San Francisco.
I see.
My family all died, and I came into a good deal of money. After that, I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that had happened to me long ago. Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die, but I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as the first lieutenant when it all began, in the Argonne Forest, where I took the remains of my machine gun battalion so far forward that there was a half-mile gap on either side of us where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, 130 men with 16 Lewis guns. And when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the piles of dead. I was promoted to a major, and every Allied government gave me a decoration. Even Montenegro, little Montenegro down on the Adriatic Sea. That's the one from Montenegro.
Watery di Danilo, Montenegro, Nicholas Rex.
Turner.
Major J. Gatsby. For valor extraordinary.
Here's another thing I always carry. Souvenir of the Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Doncaster. I'm going to make a big request of you today, so I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there, trying to forget the sad things that happened to me. You'll hear about it this afternoon.
At lunch?
No, this afternoon. I happened to find out that you're taking Miss Baker to tea.
Do you mean you're in love with Miss Baker?
No, old sport, I'm not. But Miss Baker has kindly consented to speak to you about this matter.
I hadn't the faintest idea what this matter was, and he wouldn't say another word. I was more annoyed than interested. I was sure the request would be something utterly fantastic, and for a moment I was sorry I'd ever set foot upon his overpopulated lawn. I hadn't asked Jordan to tea in order to discuss Mr. J. Gatsby, but discuss Mr. J. Gatsby we did.
One October day in 1917, I was walking along from one place to another, half on the sidewalks and half on the lawns. I was happier on the lawns because I had on shoes from England with rubber knobs on the soles that bit into the soft ground. I had on a new plaid skirt that also blew a little in the wind, and whenever this happened, the red, white, and blue banners in front of all the houses stretched out stiff and said in a disapproving way. The largest of the banners and the largest of the lawns belonged to Daisy Faye's house. She was just 18, 2 years older than me, and by far the most popular of all the young girls in Louisville. She dressed in white and had a little white roadster, and all day long the telephone rang at her house, and excited young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolizing her for the night. When I came opposite her house that morning, her white roadster was beside the curb, and she was sitting in it with a lieutenant I had never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other that she didn't even see me until I was 5 feet away.
Hello, Jordan. Please come here.
I was flattered that she wanted to speak to me, because of all the older girls, I admired her most. She asked me if I was going to the Red Cross to make bandages, and I was. Well, then, would I tell them that she couldn't come that day? The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking in a way that every young girl wants to be looked at sometime, and because it seemed romantic to me, I've remembered the incident ever since. His name was J. Gatsby, and I didn't lay eyes on him again for over 4 years. Even after I'd met him on Long Island, I didn't realize it was the same man. That was 1917. By the next year, I had a few beaux myself, and I began to play in tournaments, so I didn't see Daisy very often. She went with a slightly older crowd, when she went with anyone at all. Wild rumors were circulating about her, how her mother had found her packing her bag one winter night to go to New York and say goodbye to a soldier who was going overseas. She was effectually prevented, but she wasn't on speaking terms with her family for several weeks. After that, she didn't play around with the soldiers anymore, but only with a few flat-footed, short-sighted young men in town who couldn't get into the army at all. By the next summer, she was gay again, gay as ever. She had a debut after the armistice, and in February, she was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. In June, she married Tom Buchanan of Chicago with more pomp and circumstance than Louisville ever knew about. He came down with 100 people in 4 private cars and hired a whole floor of the Mulbach Hotel. And the day before the wedding, he gave her a string of pearls valued at $350,000. I was a bridesmaid. I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner and found her lying on her bed, as lovely as the June night in her flower dress, and as drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle in one hand and a letter in the other.
Congratulate me. Never had a drink before, but oh, how I do enjoy it.
I was scared, I can tell you. I'd never seen a girl like that before.
Here, dearies.
She groped around in a wastebasket she had with her on the bed and pulled out the string of pearls.
Take them downstairs and give them back to whoever they belong to. Tell them all Daisy's changed her mind. Say Daisy's changed her mind.
She began to cry. She cried and cried. I rushed out and found her mother's maid, and we locked the door and got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. She took it into the tub with her and squeezed it up in a wet ball, and only let me leave it in the soap dish when she saw that it was coming to pieces like snow.
I didn't go to see him. I didn't go to see him.
Well, about 6 weeks ago, she heard the name Gatsby for the first time in years. It was when I asked you, do you remember, if you knew Gatsby in West Egg? After you'd gone home, she came into my room and woke me up and said, "What Gatsby?" And when I described him, I was half asleep, she said in the strangest voice that it must be the man she used to know. It wasn't until then that I connected this Gatsby with the officer in her white car.
What a strange coincidence.
But it wasn't a coincidence at all.
Why not?
Gatsby bought that house so that Daisy would be just across the bay. He wants to know if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and then let him come over.
Did I have to know all this before he could ask such a little thing?
He's afraid. He's waited so long, he thought you might be offended. You see, he's regular tough underneath it all.
Why didn't he ask you to arrange a meeting?
He wants her to see his house, and your house is right next door. I think he half expected her to wander into one of his parties some night, but she never did. Then he began asking people casually if they knew her, and I was the first one he found. It was that night he sent for me at his dance, and you should have heard the elaborate way he worked up to it. Of course, I immediately suggested a luncheon in New York, and I thought he'd go mad. When I said you were a particular friend of Tom's, he started to abandon the whole idea. He doesn't know very much about Tom, though he says he's read a Chicago paper for years, just on the chance of catching a glimpse of Daisy's name. And Daisy ought to have something in her life.
Does she want to see Gatsby?
She's not to know about it. Gatsby doesn't want her to know. You're just supposed to invite her to tea.
The day agreed upon was pouring rain. At 11 o'clock, a man in a raincoat, dragging a lawnmower, tapped on my front door and said that Mr. Gatsby had sent him over to cut my grass. This reminded me of all that I had forgotten. So I drove into West Egg Village to buy some cups and lemons and flowers. The flowers were unnecessary, for at 2 o'clock a greenhouse arrived from Gatsby's with innumerable receptacles to contain it. An hour later, the front door opened nervously, and in came Gatsby, with signs of sleeplessness behind his eyes.
Have you everything you need in the shape of tea?
Yes.
It's raining. Nobody's coming to tea. It's too late. I can't wait all day.
Don't be silly. It's only 2 minutes to 4.
Is this absolutely where you live, my dearest one? Are you in love with me? Or why did I have to come alone? Well, I certainly am awfully glad to see you again.
We've met before.
We haven't met for many years.
5 years next November.
I'll be back.
Where?
Where are you going? I've got to speak to you about something before you go. Oh, God.
What's the matter?
This is a terrible mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake.
You're just embarrassed, that's all. Daisy's embarrassed too.
She's embarrassed?
Just as much as you are.
Don't talk so loud.
You're acting like a little boy. Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy's sitting in there all alone. It stopped raining.
Has it? What do you think of that, Daisy? It's stopped raining.
I'm glad, Jay.
I want you and Daisy to come over to my house. I'd like to show her around.
You're sure you want me to come?
Absolutely, old sport. My house looks well, doesn't it? See how the whole front of it catches the light?
That huge place there?
Do you like it?
I love it, but I don't see how you live there all alone.
I keep it always full of interesting people, night and day. People who do interesting things, celebrated people.
We wandered through Gatsby's house, through period bedrooms swathed in rose and lavender silk and vivid with new flowers, through dressing rooms and pool rooms and bathrooms with sunken baths. Finally, we came to Gatsby's own apartment, where we sat down and drank a glass of some chartreuse he took from a cupboard in the wall. He opened for us 2 hulking patent cabinets, which held his massed suits and dressing gowns and ties, and his shirts, piled like bricks in stacks of a dozen high.
I've got a man in England who buys me clothes. He sends over for a selection of things at the beginning of each season, spring and fall.
He took out a pile of shirts and began throwing them, one by one, before us. Shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in a many-colored disarray. While we admired, he bought more, and the soft, rich heap mounted higher. Shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids of coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange, with monograms from Indian blue. Suddenly, with a strange sound, Daisy bent her head into the shirts and began to cry stormily.
They're such beautiful shirts. It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before.
End of Act 1. Act 2, Gatsby's Party.
These things excite me so.
Look around.
I'm looking. It's amazing. I'm having a marvelous.
You must see the faces of many people you've heard about.
We don't go around very much. In fact, I was just thinking, I don't know a soul here.
Perhaps you know that lady.
She's lovely.
The man bending over her is her director.
Gatsby took them unceremoniously from group to group, introducing them as
Mrs. Buchanan and Mr. Buchanan, the polo player.
Oh, no, not me.
But evidently, the sound of it pleased Gatsby from Tom remained.
Mr. Buchanan, the polo player.
For the rest of the evening, Daisy and Gatsby danced until he was, perhaps predictably, pulled away by his business.
Excuse me.
Who is this Gatsby, anyhow? Some big bootlegger?
Where'd you hear that?
I didn't hear it, I imagined it. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, you know.
Not Gatsby.
Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together.
At least they're more interesting than the people we know.
You didn't look so interested.
Well, I was. Lots of people come who haven't been invited. They simply force their way in, and he's too polite to object.
I'd like to know who he is and what he does. I think I'll make a point of finding out.
I can tell you right now. He owned some drugstores, a lot of drugstores. He built them up himself. Good night, Nick.
She didn't like it.
Of course she did.
She didn't like it. She didn't have a good time. I feel far away from her. It's hard to make her understand.
You mean about the dance?
Dance. Well, sport, the dances are important. I want nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, I never loved you. After she obliterates 4 years with that sentence, we could decide upon the more practical measures to be taken. After she's free, we can go back to Louisville and be married from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago. And she doesn't understand. She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours.
I wouldn't ask too much of her. You can't repeat the past.
Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can. I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before. She'll see.
Almost 5 years. There must have been moments, even that afternoon, when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams. Not through her own fault, but because of the colossal validity of his illusion. It had gone beyond her, beyond everything. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man can store up in his ghostly heart. After some weeks of silence, where I almost began to think that he had vanished from the earth, Gatsby called me on the phone.
Nick, old sport.
Going away?
No.
I hear you fired all your servants.
I wanted somebody that wouldn't gossip. Daisy comes over quite often, in the afternoons. Nick, I'm calling up at Daisy's request. Would you like to come to lunch at her house tomorrow? Miss Baker will be there.
Half an hour later, Daisy herself telephoned, and seemed relieved to find that I was coming. Something was up, and yet I couldn't believe that they would choose this occasion for a scene. The next day was broiling, almost the last and certainly the warmest of the summer. Through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind, carrying the sound of a telephone bell out to Gatsby and me as we waited at the door. The room, shadowed well with awnings, was dark and cool. Daisy and Jordan lay among the enormous couch, like silver idols weighing down their own white dresses against the singing breeze of the fans.
We can't move.
We can't move.
And Mr. Thomas Buchanan, the athlete?
The rumor is that that's Tom's girl on the telephone.
Very well, then I won't sell you the car at all. I'm under no obligations to you at all. And As for you bothering me about it at lunchtime, I won't stand that at all.
Holding down the receiver.
No, he's not. It's a bona fide deal. I happen to know about it.
Mr. Gatsby, I'm glad to see you, sir. Nick?
Make us a cold drink.
As he left the room again, she got up and went over to Gatsby and pulled his face down, kissing him on the mouth.
You know I love you.
You forget there's a lady present.
Then you kiss Nick, too.
What a low, vulgar girl.
I don't care.
They certainly look cool.
We drank in long, painful silence.
I read somewhere that the sun's getting hotter every year. It seems that pretty soon the Earth's going to fall into the sun. Or, wait a minute. It's just the opposite. The sun's getting colder every year.
What'll we do with ourselves this afternoon? And the day after that? And the next 30 years?
Don't be morbid. Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall.
But it's so hot and everything's so confused. Let's all go to town. Who wants to go to town? Oh, you look so cool, Jay. You always look so cool. You resemble the advertisement of the man. You know, the advertisement of the man.
All right. I'm perfectly willing to go to town. Come on. We're all going to town. Come on. What's the matter anyhow? We're going to town. Let's start.
Are we just going to go? Like this? Aren't we going to let anyone smoke a cigarette first?
Everybody smoked all through lunch.
Oh, let's have fun. It's too hot to fuss. Have it your way. Come on, Jordan.
I don't see the idea of going to town when we get these notions in their heads.
Shall we take anything to drink?
I'll get some whiskey.
I can't say anything in his house, old sport.
She's got an indiscreet voice. It's full of...
Her voice is full of money. Shall we all go in my car? I ought to have left it in the shade.
Is it standard shift?
Yes.
Well, you take my coupe and let me drive your car to town.
I don't think there's much gas.
Plenty of gas. And it runs out, I can and if it runs out, I can stop at a drugstore. You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays. Come on, Daisy. I'll take you in Mr. Gatsby's circus wagon.
You take Nick and Jordan. We'll follow in the coupe.
Did you see that?
See what?
You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you? Perhaps I am, but I have almost a second sight sometimes that tells me what to do. Maybe you don't believe that, but science... I've made a small investigation of this fellow. I could have gone deeper if I'd known.
Do you mean you've been to a medium?
What? A medium?
About Gatsby?
About Gatsby? No, I haven't. I said I'd been making a small investigation of his past.
And you found he was an Oxford man.
An Oxford man. Like hell he is. He wears a pink suit.
Nevertheless, he's an Oxford man.
Oxford, New Mexico, or something like that.
Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to lunch?
Daisy invited him. She knew him before we were married. God knows where. I'm stopping for gas. Wilson, let's have some gas. What do you think we stopped for? To admire the view?
Sick. Been sick all day.
What's the matter?
I'm all run down.
Well, shall I help myself? You sounded well enough on the phone.
I didn't mean to interrupt your lunch, but I need money pretty bad, and I was wondering what you were going to do with your old car.
How do you like this one? I bought it last week.
That's a nice yellow one.
Like to buy it?
Big chance. No, but I could make some money on the other.
What do you want money for all of a sudden?
I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west.
Your wife does.
She's been talking about it for 10 years, and now she's going whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her right.
What do I owe you?
I just got wised up to something funny the last 2 days. That's why I want to get away. It's why I've been bothering you about the car.
What do I owe you?
$1.20.
I'll let you have that car. I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon.
There is no confusion like the confusion of a simple mind. And as we drove away, Tom was feeling the hot whips of panic. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago secure and involatile, were slipping precipitously from his control. Instinct made him step on the accelerator with the double purpose of overtaking Daisy and leaving Wilson behind. And we sped along toward Astoria at 50 miles an hour until, among the spidery girders of the elevated, we came in sight of the easygoing blue coupe. And soon enough, the plaza.
It's a swell suite.
Open another window.
There aren't any more.
Well, we'd better telephone for an axe.
The thing to do is to forget about the heat. You make it 10 times worse by crabbing about it.
Why not let her alone, old sport? You're the one who wanted to come to town.
That's a great expression of yours, isn't it?
What is?
Well, this old sport business. Where'd you pick that up?
Now, see here, Tom. If you're going to make personal remarks, I won't stay here a minute more. Call up and order some ice for the mint julep.
By the way, Mr. Gatsby, I understand you're an Oxford man.
Not exactly.
Oh, yes, I understand you went to Oxford.
Yes, I went there.
When?
I told you I went there.
I heard you, but I'd like to know when.
It was 1919. I only stayed 5 months. That's why I can't really call myself an Oxford man. It was an opportunity they gave to some of the officers after the armistice. We could go to any of the universities in England or France.
Open the whiskey, Tom, and I'll make you a mint julep. Then you won't seem so stupid to yourself. Look at the mint.
Wait a minute. I want to ask Mr. Gatsby one more question.
Go on.
What kind of a row are you trying to cause in my house anyhow?
He isn't causing a row. You're causing a row. Please have a little self-control.
Self-control. I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from nowhere make love to your wife. Well, if that's the idea, you can count me out. Nowadays, people begin by sneering at family life and family institutions, and the next they'll throw everything overboard and women will be in the workplace. I know I'm not very popular. I don't give big parties. I suppose you've got to make your house into a pigsty in order to have any friends in the modern world.
I've got something to tell you, old sport.
Please don't. Please, let's all go home. Why don't we all go home?
That's a good idea. Come on, Tom. Nobody wants a drink.
I want to know what Mr. Gatsby has to tell me.
Your wife doesn't love you. She's never loved you. She loves me.
You must be crazy.
She never loved you. Do you hear? She only married you because I was poor and she was tired of waiting for me. And it was a terrible mistake. But in her heart, she's never loved anyone except me.
Sit down, Daisy. What's been going on? I want to hear all about it.
I told you what's going on. Going on for 5 years, and you didn't know.
You've been seeing this fellow for 5 years?
Not seeing. No, we couldn't be. But both of us loved each other all that time, old sport. And you didn't know. I used to laugh sometimes to think you didn't know.
Oh, that's all. You're crazy. I can't speak about what happened 5 years ago because I didn't know Daisy then. And I'll be damned if I see how you got within a mile of her unless you brought the groceries to the back door. But all the rest, that's a goddamn lie. Daisy loved me when she married me, and she loves me now.
No.
She does, though. The trouble is that sometimes she gets foolish ideas in her head and doesn't know what she's doing. And what's more, I love Daisy too. Once in a while I go off on a spree and make a fool of myself, but I always come back. And in my heart, I love her all the time.
You're revolting. Do you know why we left Chicago? I'm surprised that they didn't treat you to the story of that little spree.
Daisy, that's all over now. It doesn't matter anymore. Just tell him the truth, that you never loved him, and it's all wiped out forever.
Why? How could I love him? Possibly.
You never loved him.
I never loved him.
Not at the Capiolani?
No.
Not that day I carried you down from the punch bowl to keep your shoes dry? Daisy?
Please don't. There, Jay. You want too much. I love you now. Isn't that enough? I can't help what's past. I did love him once, but I loved you too.
You loved me too?
You loved me too?
See, even that's a lie. She didn't know you were alive. Why, there's things between Daisy and me that you'll never know, that neither of us can ever forget.
I want to speak to Daisy alone. She's all excited now.
Even alone, I can't say I never loved Tom. It wouldn't be true.
Of course it wouldn't.
As if it mattered to you.
Of course it matters. I'm going to take better care of you from now on.
You don't understand. You're not going to take care of her anymore.
I'm not. Why is that?
Daisy's leaving you.
Nonsense.
I am, though.
She's not leaving me. Certainly not for a common swindler who would have to steal the ring he put on her finger.
I won't stand this. Please, let's get out.
Who are you, anyhow? You're one of the bunch that hangs around with Meyer Wolfsheim. That much I happen to know. I've made a little investigation into your affairs, and I'll carry it further tomorrow.
You can suit yourself about that, old sport.
I found out what your drug stores were. He and this Wolfsheim brought up a lot of side street drugstores here in Chicago and sold grain alcohol over the counter. That's one of his little stunts. I picked him for a bootlegger for the first time I saw him, and I wasn't far wrong.
What about it, old sport?
Don't you call me old sport. That drugstore business was just small change, but you've got something on now that everyone's afraid to tell me about.
I glanced at Daisy, who was staring terrified between Gatsby and her husband, and at Jordan, who had begun to balance an invisible but absorbing object on the tip of her chin. Then I turned back to Gatsby, and was startled at his expression. He looked, and this is said in all contempt for the blabbed slander of his garden, as if he killed a man. For a moment, the set of his face could be described in just that fantastic way. It passed, and he began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against accusations that had not been made. But with every word, she was drawing further and further into herself. So he gave that up, and only the dead dream fought on as the afternoon slipped away, trying to touch what was no longer tangible, struggling unhappily, undespairingly, toward the lost voice across the room.
Please, Tom. I can't stand this anymore.
You two start on home, Daisy, in Mr. Gatsby's car. Go on, he won't annoy you. I think he realizes that his presumptuous little flirtation is over. Want any of this whiskey? Jordan? Nick? Nick?
What?
Want any?
No. I just remembered today's my birthday. I was 30. Before me stretched the portentous, menacing road of a new decade. It was 7 o'clock when we got into the coupe with him and started for Long Island. Tom talked incessantly, exulting and laughing, but his voice was as remote from Jordan and me as the foreign clamor of the sidewalk or the tumult of the elevated overhead. Human sympathy has its limits, and we were content to let all of their tragic arguments fade with the city lights behind. 30. The promise of a decade of loneliness, a thinning list of single men to know, a thinning briefcase of enthusiasm, thinning hair. But there was Jordan beside me, who, unlike Daisy, was too wise ever to carry well-forgotten dreams from age to age. As we passed over the dark bridge, her warm face fell lazily against my coat's shoulder, and the formidable stroke of 30 died away with the reassuring pressure of her hand. So we drove toward death through the cooling twilight.
George, let me go right now.
You're going to stay in this house till the day after tomorrow, and then we're moving away.
I'm not moving. I want to stay. Why make me go? There's no reason to make me.
Stop. Pack your things and get ready to go.
Oh. Beat me. Throw me down and beat me, you dirty little coward. I'm leaving this apartment and I'm gonna call.
Ed ran the cover outside the garage was the principal witness of the inquest. He stated that at some point during the argument, Mrs. Wilson pushed her way out of the apartment doorway and practically tumbled down the stairs onto the street. She threw herself in the way of the car, waving her hands and shouting. Before he could try and pull her away, the business was over. The death car, as the newspapers called it, didn't stop. Came out of the gathering darkness, wavered tragically for a moment, and then disappeared around the next bend. The witness wasn't even sure of its color. He told the first policeman that it was light green. Tom and I stopped, hearing another witness say that it was a yellow car.
Goddamn coward.
Tom whimpered as he sobbed over Myrtle's body.
He didn't even stop his car.
The Buchanan's house floated suddenly toward us through the dark, rustling trees. Tom stopped beside the porch, looked up at the second floor, where 2 windows bloomed with light among the vines.
Daisy's home. I ought to have dropped you in West Egg, Nick. There's nothing we can do tonight. I'll telephone for a taxi to take you home, and while you're waiting, you and Jordan better go in the kitchen and have them get you some supper, if you want any. Come in.
No thanks. But I'd be glad if you'd order me a taxi. I'll just wait outside.
Won't you come in, Nick?
No, thanks.
It's only 9:30.
I'd be damned if I'd go in. I'd had enough of all of them that one day, and suddenly that included Jordan too. She must have seen something of this in my expression, for she turned abruptly away and ran up the porch steps into the house. I sat down for a few minutes with my head in my hands, until I heard the phone taken up inside and the butler's voice calling a taxi. Then I walked slowly down the driveway from the house, intending to wait by the gate. I hadn't gotten 30 yards when I heard my name, and Gatsby stepped from behind 2 bushes into the path. I must have felt pretty weird by that time, because I could think of nothing except the luminosity of his pink suit under the moon. What are you doing?
Just standing here, old sport. Did you see any trouble on the road?
Yes.
Was she killed?
Yes.
I thought so. I told Daisy I thought so. It's better that the shock should come all at once. She stood it pretty well. I go to West Egg by a side road and I left my car in my garage. I don't think anyone saw us, but of course I can't be sure. Who was the woman?
Her name was Wilson. Her husband owns the garage. How the devil did that happen?
Well, I tried to swing the wheel.
What was Daisy driving?
Yes. But of course, I'll say I was. You see, when we left New York, she was very nervous and she thought it would steady her to drive. And this woman rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. And it all happened in a minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us, thought we were somebody she knew. Well, first Daisy turned away from the woman toward the other car, but then she lost her nerve and turned back. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly.
It ripped her open right down.
Don't tell me, old sport. Anyhow, Daisy stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, but she couldn't, so I pulled on the emergency brake. And she fell over into my lap and I drove on. She'll be all right tomorrow. I'm just gonna wait here and see if he tries to bother her about all that unpleasantness this afternoon. She's locked herself into her room, and if he tries any brutality, she's gonna turn the light out and then on again.
He won't touch her. He's not thinking about her.
I don't trust him, old sport.
How long are you gonna wait?
All night if necessary. Anyhow, till I go to bed.
Oh my God. He killed her. He murdered her. I have a way of finding out about that car. I know I'm one of those trusting fellas that I don't think harm to nobody. But when I get to know a thing, I know it. It was that man in that car. She ran out to speak to him, and he wouldn't stop. I spoke to her. I told her she might fool me, but she couldn't fool God. I took her to the window. I said, God knows what you've been doing, everything you've been doing. You may fool me, but you can't fool God. God sees everything.
I can't describe to you how surprised I was to find out I loved her, old sport. I even hoped for a while that she'd throw me over, but she didn't. Because she was in love with me too. She thought I knew a lot because I knew different things from her. Well, there I was, way off my ambitions, getting deeper in love every minute. And all of a sudden, I didn't care. What was the use of doing great things if I could have a better time telling her what I was going to do? I don't think she ever loved him. You must remember, old sport, she was very excited this afternoon. He told her those things in a way that frightened her, that made it look as if I was some kind of cheap sharper. And the result was that she hardly knew what she was saying. Of course she might have loved him, just for a minute, when they were first married. And loved me more even then. Do you see? In any case, it was just personal. You know, old sport, I've never used that pool, not all summer.
12 minutes to my train. I'll call you up.
Do, old sport.
I'll call you about noon.
I suppose Daisy will call too.
I suppose so.
Goodbye.
We shook hands and I started away. Just before I reached the hedge, I remembered something and turned around. They're a rotten crowd. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together. I've always been glad I said that. It was the only compliment I ever gave him, because I disapproved of him from beginning to end. First, he nodded politely, and then his face broke into that radiant and understanding smile, as if we'd been in ecstatic cahoots on the fact all the time. His gorgeous pink rag of a suit made a bright spot of color against the white steps. And I thought of the night when I first came to his ancestral home 3 months before. The lawn and drive had been crowded with the faces of those who guessed at his corruption. And he stood on those steps, concealing his incorruptible dream as he waved them goodbye. I thanked him for his hospitality. We were always thanking him for that, I and the others. I called Gatsby's house the next day, but the line was busy. I tried 4 times. Finally, an exasperated central told me the wire was being kept open for long distance from Detroit. Taking out my timetable, I drew a small circle around the 3:50 train. Then I leaned back in my chair and tried to think. It was just noon. At 2 o'clock, Gatsby put on his bathing suit and left word with the butler that if anyone phoned, word was to be brought to him at the pool. He stopped at the garage for a pneumatic mattress that had amused his guests during the summer, and the chauffeur helped him pump it up. Then he gave instructions that the open car wasn't to be taken out under any circumstances. And this was strange, because the front right fender needed repair. Gatsby shouldered the mattress and started for the pool. Once he stopped and shifted it a little, and the chauffeur asked him if he needed help, but he shook his head and in a moment disappeared among the yellowing trees. No telephone message arrived, but the butler went without his sleep and waited for it until 4 o'clock, until long after there was anyone to give it to if it came. I have an idea that Gatsby himself didn't believe it would come, or perhaps he no longer cared. If that were true, he must have felt that he had lost the old, warm world, paid a high price for living too long with a single dream. He must have looked up at an unfamiliar sky through frightening leaves and shivered as he found what a grotesque thing a rose is, and how raw the sunlight was upon the scarcely created grass. A new world, material without being real, where poor ghosts breathing dreams like air drifted fortuitously about, like that ashen, fantastic figure gliding toward him through the amorphous trees. The chauffeur, he was one of Wolfsheim's protégés, heard the shots. Afterward, he could only say that he hadn't thought anything much about them. I drove from the station directly to Gatsby's house, and my rushing anxiously up the front steps was the first thing that alarmed anyone. But they knew then, I firmly believe. With scarcely a word said, 4 of us, the chauffeur, butler, gardener, and I hurried down to the pool. There was a faint, barely perceptible movement of the water as the fresh flow from one end urged its way toward the drain at the other. With little ripples, there was hardly a shadow of waves. The laden mattress moved irregularly down the pool. A small gust of wind that scarcely corrugated the surface was enough to disturb its accidental course with its accidental burden. The touch of a cluster of leaves revolved it slowly, tracing, like the leg of transit, a thin red circle in the water. It was after we started with Gatsby toward the house that the gardener saw Wilson's body a little way away, off in the grass, and the Holocaust was complete. One afternoon, late October, I saw Tom Buchanan. He was walking ahead of me along Fifth Avenue in his alert, aggressive way, his hands out out a little from his body, as if to fight off interference, his head moving sharply here and there, adapting itself to his restless eyes. Just as I slowed up to avoid overtaking him, he stopped and began frowning into the windows of a jewelry store. Suddenly he saw me and walked back, holding out his hand.
What's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking hands with me?
Yes. You know what I think of you.
You're crazy, Nick. Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you.
Tom, what did you say to Wilson that afternoon?
I told him the truth. He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and when I sent down word that we weren't in, he tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned the car. His hand was on a revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house. What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust in your eyes just like he did in Daisy's. But he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like you'd run over a dog and never even stopped his car.
I couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw that what he had done was, to him, entirely justified. It was all very, very careless and confused. They were careless people. Tom and Daisy, they smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money and their vast carelessness, or whatever it was that kept them together, and let other people clean up the mess they had made. And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way in this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him. Somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eludes us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms further, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
End of play. Thank you for joining us for The Great Gatsby. A big thanks to our friend, Your Friendly Neighborhood Shakespeare. Visit him at his website, shakespeareapproves.com, or on Facebook at Shakespeare Approves, Your Friendly Neighborhood Shakespeare. We've got links to all of his content and more in the comments of this video. A big thank you also to all of the actors who volunteered to read with us tonight, and a special thanks to Haley Height and Taylor Flanagan, our interpreters for this evening. If you enjoyed this reading, all of our past readings are available on our Facebook page and a little better organized on our website, zenithplayers.com. If you want more information on us, including how to be involved in a reading like this one and be one of these readers you see in front of us, head to our Facebook page, Zenith Players, send us a message or send an email to casting@zenithplayers.com and we'll get you right on board. We want to continue to express our support to everyone out there keeping us healthy and safe and vaccinated. Join us next Saturday as we return to ancient Greece with the Bacchae. Thank you and good night.